Cool. So, as we were saying, we sent out 10 surveys this year across 3 different emails, and also sent them out via social media. We got about a 50% increase year on year with people that were completing the surveys. And because we did 10 surveys instead of 1, we got a 329% increase in people that completed more than 1 survey. I think on average they completed about 3. Just to touch on, so voice of the customer, we've chosen to measure our success based on Net Promoter Score, which is basically, it allows us to ask our community how they'd rate us on a scale of 1 to 10 or 0 to 10. And it's it's a bit clearer measure than just customer satisfaction, because customer satisfaction really just aligns with one service. So Net Promoter Score is really a good metric to measure the success of our organisation as a whole. Just a couple of things I thought I'd mention. Global pressures that sort of influence sentiment towards local government include the 2020 election date moving more closely aligned to the US election date. If you haven't heard from her already, Kate Hanna is a really interesting lead researcher on disinformation in New Zealand, and she's done some work on this. Also, there was some pro-Kremlin sentiment in 2021, and obviously the war on Ukraine and the impact that has on our global financial markets and our market more closer to home. Sentiment is influenced by a few things nationally, which includes COVID-19, the cost of living, and local government reforms. So food prices increased by 12.5% to July 2023. The official cash rate is sitting at 5.5%. From July, fuel went up at the pump by 29 cents. That's coupled with the fact that the average income for our people in our district is 26% lower than the national average, also sitting at a 6% inflation rate. And the employee index research suggests that 82% of Kiwis are concerned about a recession. It also stated that there's a lot more stress out there in households as a result of these financial pressures. So just setting the scene for not just how Horowhenua District Council is perceived by our community, but how local government is perceived by the rest of the country, and also about how central government too is perceived by the people that live in Aotearoa. We're going to switch to, so Martin's going to have a talk now about Net Promoter Score.
Evening all. Firstly, by way of a brief introduction, my name's Martin McGrath, and I'm a business intelligence analyst here at Council. As we start to look into the different metrics that we receive through our community surveys, I want to start with 2 key metrics that I think are sort of at the top of the tree in importance about how we're doing as a council and the way we act and the way we interact with our community. And the first one is the Net Promoter Score. And this year we took our score from -16 to a score of -8. But what does that really mean? And is that a good score, or how do we interpret that score? So if you think about our community and you say we've got 2,000 people that responded as individuals to this survey, a -8 shift, or a +8 shift, is effectively taking 160 people that were detractors and moving them across that scale into being the passive range. That's quite a serious chunk, and it's effectively around 20% of our detractors have moved over this last year from being detractors into being more passive, and a few of our passives becoming promoters. So it's quite a significant change in what our community is seeing us as a council. The next thing I think we should talk about is that last year there was discussion around what we would target for a Net Promoter Score this year. We achieved -16 last year, and the target, I guess, was -10 this year. So to achieve the -8 score that we have come up with now is a great result. And I think, we should give ourselves a pat on the back, but there's also a lot of room for improvement. I'd like to think that, if we can get a positive 8 change this year, get a positive 8 change next year, we're at 0. And what 0 means is that we have as many promoters as we do have detractors. And then we can maybe even go beyond that, which would be fabulous.
Should we also point out that so Net Promoter Score is a range of -100 to +100. Most private companies use Net Promoter Score as their metric for success, but few local government bodies do. They more often than not will use a customer satisfaction score. When we looked at, there's a body of research that says that public sector organisations, it's probably better if we use promoters are like the people that have scored us a 10 or a 9, so they absolutely love us. Passives are people that have scored us a 7 or an 8. 7 or 8 is still pretty good in my mind. So there's a body of work that says that perhaps public sector should count the 7s to 10s as a way of looking at overall net promoter score. So we moved our net promoter score for public sector by 16 points, I think, up to 31. So we've shifted a lot of the passives, we're shifting them along the line quite well, and I think that's just an interesting point to note too.
The second metric that I really think we need to look at, because it's one of those high-level metrics that are across the whole organisation, and that's our overall customer satisfaction. This year, as you can see from the chart, we've moved it up 6%, which again I think is success, a really good result. I want to talk a little bit about trustworthiness of the score, because obviously we're trying to assess what the community is telling us and how much we can rely on that as a guide to what we may want to do next and where we want to look to improve things. So what we've done with these scores is we've also analysed them from what's the chance that score came about purely by chance. And with that particular score, it's negligible that score happened purely by chance. So if we were to run the same survey 100 times, we would only get one result that came back with a score around 63.2%. And all the other scores would be above 63.2%. So that's quite significant. So there's a strong relationship with statistical significance around that, saying that score didn't just happen because we sampled some random people differently and things like that. So that's a great result, and if we can achieve similar result next year, we're really heading in a great direction. I think from the discussion I had earlier, the target metric for overall satisfaction from last year was to improve things by 5%, so we've exceeded that by the 1%. Understanding how we read those metrics is important from the confidence we get and how we want to look at where we want to focus our attention over the coming period. We don't want to lose our performance in these areas, but we need to think about what are the important areas that are actually going to make a difference overall to our community, so that as a council we looked more as an advocate, rather than as a detractor. So we're going to start breaking into some of the specific areas that of the business that we surveyed. This one here is around our water, and in the brackets there it talks about how much we can rely on the information. So there's the very high for the wastewater services and the drinking water quality. So those results, we can trust that they're really important to us. What is interesting is that the drinking water quality has gone down quite significantly. And what we're going to do as we delve into these metrics a bit later on is we're going to analyse them a bit more as to why some of these metrics have gone down the way they have, or how can we relate that to a segment where that's been the end result. This is with curbside rubbish and recycling. Overall, they've been moving in the right direction, because the ones that have gone, there's a couple up there that have pretty much maintained equilibrium with where they were last year. The curbside recycling and the curbside rubbish tend to indicate that our service providers are doing a good job in regards to the service provided there. And the other metrics, as I say, they haven't really shifted much, and it's maybe whether those are areas that we need to start thinking about to try and bring them up into the higher levels as well. The land transport results, this is a really interesting one to me because the metrics are all very much similar to last year. But in saying that, they're also quite low. So to me, it's still, whilst we haven't made any significant improvements in this area, I think this is an area of the business that we need to be looking at more closely. The metrics shown here have shown to be key drivers of negative, detractor scores and our NPS scores. So even though they're not shifting, they're still largely focused on by our community as being a major influencer as a detractor.
Can I just ask, and I've seen Lisa, your team respond to this a lot on social media, the perception about the condition of the roads, like state highways and potholes and stuff like that, and how that influences this kind of stuff, because it feels like there's some unfairness to, there's an education piece to get people to understand what it is we're actually doing and what we're responsible for, because you can see that some of the negative stuff towards Waka Kotahi is actually landing with us, even though it's misplaced.
I definitely think there's a role for comms and engagement to play in shifting these metrics. There's a perception maybe that we're not communicating what we do in this area well enough. You'll see in a few slides later on that we've delved a bit deeper into what people are marking, why we're getting a low satisfaction score, or why they're the source of a lot of detractor scores that we're receiving. So, yeah, absolutely. There's a lot of misinformation out there, and I think we could definitely do a better job at talking about what we do in the roading and land transport space.
But we do know that in the 2021 Local Government New Zealand kind of reputation survey across New Zealand, 42% of people who responded thought that local councils were responsible for state highways. So it will be a driver, but it won't be the only driver.
I'm not going next.
Horowhenua is a great place to live. I'm Margaret, and I'm a business analyst here. These results are from our quality of life survey, where we asked questions for respondents to rate on a scale of agreed, or strongly agreed to strongly disagreed. Questions around, don't know if you can read that, safe place to live, great place to live, quality of life. And the result we want to highlight is Horowhenua is a great place to live. 71% either agreed or strongly agreed with that statement, which is up 39% from last year. Library services, best performing customer satisfaction overall, with Te Takiritanga o Kurahopo achieving 95.4%. Last year in previous surveys, we only asked one question, so we asked people about all libraries in one question. This year we've decided to split it up by library, so you can see Te Takiritanga o Kurahopo 95%, Te Awaha Newsroom 94%, Shannon 80%. And so going forward, we'll keep those same questions so we can start tracking that over time too. Aquatic Centre. So we surveyed separately the Aquatic Centre users, and then we also had a general survey that went out to everyone that included aquatics. The user groups scored 91% customer satisfaction score and provided the only overall positive NPS of any survey group. That compares to 79% satisfaction from the respondents that we could identify who gave us an email, and 51% from those people who didn't want to give us their email address. So, that means anything. And sports grounds and halls also saw a significant increase year on year. And in these surveys, we asked them, have you visited cemeteries, parks and reserves, sports grounds and halls? And they only answered the question if they said yes, they had visited.
Leadership and reputation. Leadership and reputation shifted significantly this year. Increases across the board, so well done. Definitely, you guys fronting the long-term plan amendment and being a lot more visible in the community has paid off. So I'll just let you look at those results. Mayor and councillors, 16.1% increase. There's 17% transparent responsiveness has gone up to. So year on year, yeah, it's a positive sign, but there's still a way to go. Not to brag, but comms and engagement saw the most significant customer services increases year on year of any survey across the board. No, we excluded staff emails from our responses, not to bias the base. But yeah, we're pretty stoked that there's people are finding our comms a little bit more easier to understand, that they feel that they're more involved in public decision making, that the feedback process is better, that there's more information available, that they feel better informed, and that they are happier with the Lagoima, LIM and other requests that come through to the customer services team. Now we did a bit of a deep dive into some stuff, so we'll be talking about, as we go further, we haven't put any slides in here that are statistically significant, but as we do more of a deep dive into the data, the pool of data is less. These are still significant though, so water is our community's biggest talking point, followed by service and roads. After each survey, we ask people, what are we doing well and where could we improve? And so we analysed the text from all of those responses.
And just further to that too, one of the other things we found when we looked a bit deeper was that the more positive someone feels in general, the more likely they are to be talking about service in the comments that they gave. And the more negative they feel overall, the more likely they are to talk about roads. And it's almost that the positive people didn't mention roads hardly at all, and the negative people hardly mentioned service. It's quite interesting.
No, because we're one team. Tahi is one of our values.
But I did say that the library staff needed a morning t-shirt when we did our internal presentations. Healthcare is our community's biggest concern, followed by population and crime. So we asked the question, what is your biggest concern? And that came out on top. While they're talking about water, they're worried about health.
What do they mean by population?
We could do a little bit more of a deep dive, but I think it's our ability to, like, population growth and our ability to meet the demands of that growth.
Yeah, I'll add to that. That's definitely what the sentiment of that of the population metric is about. Is about our ability to handle the future population growth that's forecast.
Maybe next month.
If we think for a second back on the customer satisfaction scores, I think it's pretty clear that there's been great progress across the board nearly. There's been massive improvement. So, this has been a great last year, and I think that, it augurs well for what's going to go on from here on in. What we also did when we started looking at the Net Promoter Scores is we started to break them down into a bit of the demographics to see whether there were any trends around which are the ones that actually are advocates and which ones are perhaps less so. That's quite not easy to read, but essentially what it has shown us is that the 40 to 49-year-old age group have turned around their Net Promoter Score from a minus 16, I think it is approximately, or I can't even read it myself actually, but it's a 24-point turnaround anyway, which is just amazing. What we haven't had the time at this point to do is really analyse why that happened. Whether it was, we'll talk a bit more about that later, about what our learnings might be. And our worst performing group from an age range perspective is the 18 to 39-year-olds. They haven't really changed from last year, but they're still, that's still quite a significantly lower Net Promoter Score than the benchmark, if you like, across the board. And I will just mention one quick thing about when you read that slide and it says the benchmark's minus 9.9, and we've been talking about minus 8 the whole time. The minus 9 point, because of what Lisa mentioned about the fact that we conducted a whole series of surveys rather than one survey, that meant that an individual could answer multiple surveys. So in order to try and consolidate an individual's answers into one score, we basically removed the duplication that provided, so that any skewing of the score was taken out of the final result of minus 8. The minus 9.9 just demonstrates that there were more people answering more of the surveys that perhaps were detractors, and therefore they skewed the result down that way.
Good point.
Then we started looking into what's the situation with our wards, which I think is a key one as well. And Levin, had the greatest leap forward of 10.1 points from last year, which is fabulous. And even our lowest scoring ward, Miranui, that improved as well. In fact, all wards improved, which is fantastic. And I think that's something that is showing that across the whole district we are making improvements. We're doing things that are gaining traction with the community, and that's what we're trying to do. But it would be nice to get a bit more of a heads up on exactly why Miranui is perhaps as low as it is compared to some of the other scores.
It's just footpaths and burn mine, really.
Interesting that you say that, because we're going to talk a little bit about footpaths shortly, I think. So another one of the breakdowns that we did was we looked at how do our residents assess us. And what I found quite interesting was that our residents are actually more aligned and more of an advocate of council than our ratepayers. It's not on the slide up there, but our ratepayers scored us at minus 10.5, but our residents scored us at minus 7.9. It's not a massive difference, but it is significant given the number of people in those samples. They're not small samples. So that's another thing that perhaps as a learning we may want to start investigating why this is the case and whether it's something to do with rates or whatever it may be that is actually causing those variances. Lisa mentioned earlier about the trustworthiness or how significant some of these metrics might be, and now with this particular one we've gone a little bit down to a point where sample size is still there, but it's starting to get a little bit low to have massive confidence in these numbers. But it still shows you an indication of what it is compared to the norm and what the benchmark is. So business owners scoring minus 21.3, that's lower than our NPS score from last year. It's obviously we didn't measure this last year, I don't think. Is that correct, Lisa?
Yeah, no.
So when we measure this again in the future, that's a metric that I think we would want it to be understanding why this is the case and look to put in some plans that might address that.
So can you not see what is driving that? Like it's not like land transport is featuring heavy, because like, for example, if there was land transport outside, roadworks outside of business and it just disrupting the business, and the survey came at that time, like it could, like, is there any correlation between any specific areas?
There probably is. I guess some of the issues around time to analyse these correctly, and also the sample size getting smaller starts to, when you then trying to break that down more, you start to get into shaky ground. I think there is things that we could find out, but we want to make sure that we take them with the right level of concern or question, I guess, about how much can we rely on those metrics.
I suppose just to mention too that the Horowhenua Company Limited conducted their own survey of businesses, so that's, I think, combining the two, and our economic development metric will give us a clearer picture of the business sentiment. To give you an idea, I think the base for this was 94 business owners, so that's sort of as low as we've gone. Yeah, I think I'm next. It's putting right that counts. So what we found is people that have called us and created a CRM. So that's when a community member calls in and we log the job. It doesn't necessarily mean that they are going to give us a detractor score, and in some cases it actually means it's given us the opportunity to shine, and we've made advocates out of them. So we've taken out a couple of slides because they were verging on insignificant statistically, but we could touch on that later. So people that raised a rubbish CRM in the last year scored us a positive 4.5 NPS. And largely we're talking about this, it might be due to the fact that it's a relatively easy thing to solve. If your bin didn't get picked up, we can, fix that relatively easy, as opposed to my footpath needs repairing and we need to, schedule that work in. So it's a relatively easy fix, so that's positive. People that raised a water CRM in the last year scored us a positive 22.9 NPS. People that raised a roading CRM in the last year scored us a 15.1 NPS though. So starting to paint a little bit of a picture.
Just on that, to provide some context, it probably aligns with a lot of the positive feedback that we get. I often don't get them around when a footpath is replaced because someone's been waiting a number of years, but around the water CRMs, I regularly get ones from customers or a box of chocolates where they have a burst. We don't accept them, clearly. We have a pipe burst. The crew will turn up at 7 o'clock that night and work through to 1 in the morning, and the customer's just amazed at the speed that they were there within an hour, and they stayed there till the job's fixed. So in some ways, it kind of aligns with the data that we're receiving.
That's right. Yeah, that's kind of what we thought too, is that we can be seen to be dealing with the water issues, whereas the roading problems, they don't always go away. They recur every year. They're always visible, and that might lead to a negative impression, and people are more likely to remember negative things than positive things.
So last year, when we presented the results, we identified the key metric that was most closely aligned with our Net Promoter Score. So in other words, a highly satisfied person was more likely to be a promoter, and a low satisfied person was likely to be a detractor. And we picked out that public involvement in decision making was that most significant element. This year it's improved by 18.3%. And again, there's still a heck of a lot of room for improvement on that. But when you relate that back to what happened with the people that answered this question and how they answered the Net Promoter Score question. So this question when you isolate that group, the Net Promoter Score for this group also went up 7 points, which ties in with what we've achieved from a Net Promoter Score. So when they improved in this area and we made great improvements, it resulted in, we're not saying this is a direct result, but that was the expected, that it would also lead into improvements in our Net Promoter Score. And it has. And this year, the key one that we believe will deliver significant benefits from a Net Promoter Score level is responsiveness. What does this mean and what's the impact? Well, it's the same with the last one. If we start improving our responsiveness, whatever we do that impacts our community, our ability to respond to their needs, such as what Daniel was talking about before with water, the customer requests that we get, acting with them promptly in a timely fashion with good results, and everything we do here as a council around how we engage with our community and are we responsive to what those discussions are. That will lead us to improving our Net Promoter Score and making us look like we're actually in line with what our community is looking for. And that's, again, making our community, or not making our community wanting to be an advocate of what we are doing. So I think if we look at next year, over the next 12 months, it'll be interesting to have a look at this metric and see what the result is, and to see what the impact is on our Net Promoter Score in relation to that, and see if we can achieve some good results again. Okay, so we talked before a little bit about land transport and three waters, and doing a bit of a deeper dive into some of these areas. And what we've found is that, again, it's what's evident from the discussions, is roading maintenance is a consistently strong negative message. It's coming through from the community in all of the comments. It's across the board. It's also not necessarily isolated to any of our particular wards. So it's just one of those key metrics that's really causing our community quite a bit of grief. There could be the element that was talked about before, that it's an education issue for some of it, state versus district roads, etc. But obviously it can't be just that alone. And one of the key items that we've analysed by looking at this area more closely was in particular to footpath maintenance in the Maranui ward. And it has the lowest Net Promoter Score of all of the wards, and this was also the key metric that came through that said their concern was about footpath maintenance, and they were not, they aligned closely with their Net Promoter Score, was aligned closely to that metric. So obviously that's a particular concern in that area. And I understand from talking with Lisa earlier that may be something that's coming through our customer request system as well.
And our social media.
Now, so then looking at the water quality type of scenario and breaking that down again into our wards, one of the things that came through is that most of the wards actually rate water quality at a pretty level point. It's about 58 to 62% customer satisfaction for drinking water quality, except for one ward, and that ward's Kerry, and that came through with a result of 31% customer satisfaction this year. The decrease in drinking water quality customer satisfaction this year is largely attributable to the decrease that has been shown through Kerry ward alone. They were 42% last year and down to 31% this year. So I think that's an area that we can change that area, then we might gain some great results across the district,
Well, it's quite interesting because it was not that long ago, a few years ago now, but when there's drastic improvements made into that water quality. And I know, and it was through working Paul Gaden in terms of the green sand filters that were put in, all those sorts of things. And for quite a while, there was the sort of anecdotal commentary you saw and got was how the water had improved from, used to be quite brown at times, and people would get their washing would be dirty and all this, so and they were real concerns. But there was a massive improvement in that. So to see it deteriorate again And I know from to lots of people, the water quality, particularly Foxton Beach, where most of the problems were, is a vast improvement on what it used to be. So whether it's a lot of new people moving into the area that have come from places where the pumps north, where the water quality is high, we accept our water as bore water. I think Paul back at the time described it as sort of swampy source water that needs a lot of treatment to get it to the standard it needs to be. So I'm just interested to see why it's dropped, and I do wonder why. So interesting.
Yeah, I guess one of the things talking about watercolour, etc., versus the drinking, the taste quality, has there been? I guess that's something that we will need to look at around the lab testing. What's that telling us from those types of metrics around? They might have improved things from a watercolour perspective because of the issues they've had there. It'd be interesting to see whether they believe they made the same levels of improvement with water taste.
Can you separate the beach from the town?
I could separate the beach from the town. Yes, to a degree. Yep.
Just in terms of closest thing to a focus group, social media, last week, a comment prompted a huge number of angry responses about the quality of water, and I think from memory it was the beach, but there's some data there in terms of people feeding back, whether it's discoloration, taste or whatever. I don't know whether you saw it, Ross, but yeah.
So, Martin, with all the data we've got and for where we've got the email addresses of those respondents, we could now do a follow-up targeted survey that says, hey, you've told us the drinking water quality across Foxton and Foxton Beach is not great. Help us understand more.
Yeah, we could do that, and we could do what was discussed around breaking down that metric by Foxton Beach versus Foxton as well. Initially, before we did that, to see whether it was across the whole both areas or whether it was just isolated to the beach, and then we could use that information to actually go out with another survey to get some more information. Yeah,
We can survey the whole ward if we wanted to, just by but we'd have to have their email addresses.
We also did a bit of a deep dive into the question of, are there any issues with the road network which discourage you from regularly walking or cycling to work or school? A third of respondents said no, there's no issues. And from the rest of them, the people who did give us issues, we had a look at that. Unsurprisingly, a lot of rural living people, issues with narrow roads, no footpaths, high speed traffic, living a long distance from work or school. Not really that surprising. Road safety. Road safety was actually the next biggest scoring, and then footpath quality. So potholes and roadworks did come into it, but it wasn't the top reason. Footpath quality included things like overhanging branches, trees, vegetation, and cars parking across the footpath, because we have to remember we have a lot of mobility scooter users. 9% of the people who answered this question said they don't actually walk or cycle. So footpath quality is maybe a little bit more important to them. And then we also had things like lighting and dogs and crossings, safe crossings. Yes.
So this year as well, this is one of them, we asked some questions that align to our council's plan on a page to understand and try and get a benchmark for some things. We also asked questions that we thought would be handy to feed into community consultations. So we'll just go through those. So 75.7% of respondents disagreed or were neutral when asked if council enables affordable housing in the district. A good metric for us to have as we move forward. 32.4% were satisfied Horowhenua has accessible healthcare, so that's sort of mirrored in our what's the biggest problem stat that we had before. When people were asked how prepared they were for a significant emergency event, the average score was 6.7 out of 10. When we asked people whether we should make or consider making rainwater tanks mandatory for all new homes in the district, 66.7% of respondents said yes. When we asked respondents how important it was for them to reduce, reuse and recycle, the average score is 8.8 out of 10, so really important to our community that we reduce, reuse and recycle. When we asked them if they would support a council-funded weekly curbside food waste collection, 70% said yes or maybe, and most of those responses were yes. When we asked our community if they would support a council-funded green waste wheelie bin collection, 83% of respondents said yes or maybe, and most of those were yeses. And then this is just, it's quite good when you've got a group of data to be able to hypothesize, to understand and explore a little bit deeper. But basically this slide is just saying that people that we email are 15% more satisfied with us than people that don't receive emails from us. So if we were to increase our emailable base and do nothing else, just continue to communicate as we are, because you'd know that this year we digitised our community connection, and that's going to 8,000 ratepayers, and it was going to I think about 100 before, and predominantly was just in the paper. We digitised Puawai, and that now goes out to 2,500 55 and plus year olds. And so if we were to do nothing else but invest in increasing our digital contactable base, then we'd see a shift in both NPS and in customer satisfaction. And I suppose it's important too that we've got our residents. So currently we've got a ratepayer database that we email, but we've also got a residents database that we don't email because the data isn't of a standard that we can. It's data that, so if you ring up, for example, and you might complain about a noise complaint, or you might be ringing about a footpath, or there might be a pothole, or there might be, anything, then we capture that data, but it's not, the integrity of that data isn't 100%, but there's work that we can do to clean that data and to potentially start using that data. So that's a focus of ours, I think, going forward, is how do we improve our data so that we can contact people, more people. What's the next slide? Cool, key takeaways. We're nearly finished.
So our key learnings from the survey and the analysis. Yay, we've lifted our results, but the work's not finished. We can always do better. If we improve our responsiveness, we can improve our NPS, so that's something to focus on. Our community are most satisfied with the library services at 95%. Communications and engagement saw the most significant increases in customer satisfaction across the board. Horowhenua is a great place to live. This question saw the biggest jump, 32%. And as Lisa just said, people that receive emails from us are 15% more satisfied than those that don't. Do you want to do this?
Yeah, I think just sort of wrapping it up, we've got 2 more slides to go, but just, I suppose, learnings for us is how do we improve the quality and quantity of our data to enhance our understanding of the community and communicate better. We've got in the pipeline hardware to roll out to our community centres so that people can provide feedback to us at our pools, at our libraries in real time. So that will be exciting and something to watch out for. We'd love to deep dive into the data a little bit further, like why are 40 to 49-year-olds happier? Why are a younger age group less happier? Why, what's going on with the Miranui ward? And there's other questions too that we haven't included. Yeah, there's other questions too that we haven't analysed and included in here that would be helpful for us. I suppose we'll just leave you on one final slide, which is, should we be including wellbeing metrics in our reporting? When I look to stats for the aspects of life that are most have a strong relationship with wellbeing, the good health, enough money to meet everyday needs, that they didn't feel lonely in the last 4 weeks, and that they've got that they've got a healthy home. So I just thought I'd leave you with that as what can we do with that, and sort of how do we evolve the way that we think and talk about our community success metrics.
Just on that one, so I agree with some of it, but one it's measuring it, and then also how are you going to actually change that? Like if someone's lonely, how do you? I suppose you can try and get that interaction within the community, but it's sort of it's a little bit for me. It's a little bit different than fixing a pothole or having that customer focus, and it's just managing those matrix so you can actually I suppose do something about it.
I guess, yeah, I really like that because it's about how that information informs the other results. So, the issue around loneliness or whatever could well correspond with a very high library rating, book use, things like that. So, to me, and given also our deprivation index as a district, so I think that's a very good opportunity.
I'd like to see it a bit more targeted, Lisa, so that, to me, those are very general, wishy-washy sort of type questions. I'd rather see a question like, how difficult has it been for you to get a doctor's appointment in the last month? What's your average wait time to, have you had to travel to Palmerston for minor surgery or something? Those, I'd be interested in those sorts of things because I think we can then, that helps us advocate to those authorities or agencies, to improve the service that we get, maybe, because if we don't have that data, then we're struggling. But also, not feeling lonely. I'd agree with Paul a little bit. Unless we can actually influence, an outcome, then I don't see much point in asking the question, to be honest.
I suppose it's these metrics are harder to measure, and council doesn't just own these metrics. Like that, it's education, it's healthcare. Like there's other providers involved. There's justice. I'm not proposing to solve the world and solve the world's problems, but I do think we do work in the community wellbeing space, and we deliver services to our community that connect them, and that's part of our role, is to connect people and make them feel like they're part of a wider community, and to offer services that reach out into the community. So it's an interesting space for us to pursue.
I was expecting Dave Allen to say, we're more than rats, rubbish and roads. I thought that's how he was going to start. But the concern I have, I'm a little bit like Paul, is that if we start asking about these things, do we start creating a perception that, or an expectation that we're going to be involved or try and resolve some of these things? So that would be my concern, is that we're trying to be like, people will I think it'll be received in one of two ways. Like, people will either see us, oh, yeah, you're getting into a space that's not really yours, or it'll start to create an expectation that we do have a role, we're going to fix it. But David's going to respond now with the red light. Yeah, I'm a bit the same, but and probably not questions like that. But if we wanted to sort of canvass the wellbeing space of the community to get a temperature check, give them a feel, fine. But I'd want it totally separate from the stuff we've covered tonight in terms of the services the council are doing and etc. and provide. Because you're right, that's not, we don't own this stuff. But it's probably important that we get a feel from our community what some of the issues are that we can advocate for, as long as we fully explain that. This is not us, but we're interested in how you feel and sort of stuff, So, yeah, if you get what I mean. What I think is would be quite a good way of actually solving both those problems would be if our other agencies that are actually involved in surveying our communities across the nation and via their own segmentation, they were able to feed that into us so that we have that data available to see whether it does align with other things that we're seeing, get a better picture of what our community is actually going through, etc. But not necessarily us asking the question, but by use of data that's out there that is potentially available through understanding what they can do for us from that sort of question, etc., and surveying, and then bringing that data into our organisation to sort of start understanding these other things, along with a whole bunch of other data that we can potentially use as well.
I think the awareness mechanisms are a good way of tracking or identifying where extra intentional investment may be required. So if you take the aspect of did you feel lonely in the last 4 weeks, if that starts actually heading in the other direction, then from a community wellbeing committee perspective, that might be a conversation that might lead to initiative delivered through social services that potentially might intervene and change that in the right direction. In the same way of reaching out and looking at the money piece and looking to see what work's being done around delivering financial literacy within the community and how that gets delivered. What I'm I guess really keen on is understanding the frequency model, because I think the more frequently you measure and reach out and get responses, the more we're going to learn as we go in terms of the triggers and the mechanisms. So my kind of view would be that every single case management that gets lodged from now on that has a detractor score is then followed up with another survey to get that, okay, did it get fixed? Are you happy with it? But also, if we're not a 10, what do we have to do to get a 10 as well? I think that responsiveness piece is key. When I talk to people and they want to talk about council, it's often a story that goes with I sent an email or I had a phone call and I'm still waiting to hear back. And from a banking sense, because MPS is something bankers get sick of talking about and hearing about, to be frank, but the one key factor is, did you pick up the phone and did you return a phone call? And if you focus on that one thing, you drive MPS up. And I think that links in with the responsiveness that you've got here. I like the ability also to use this mechanism to test this with our community, because I'm really mindful that these are our ideas that have been generated from what we thought the community needed, and I think that this sort of mechanism is a really good way for us to test that we're on the right path with our community, that do they agree that the number one issue is housing affordability, or whatever it happens to be. But I think we can use the tool to also shape and potentially the 40 to 49 split, and also the lift in, I guess, the leadership mayors and councillors. one of the influencing factors might be for that particular age demographic is that council mirrors that age group significantly better than it did last year. So there are more 40 to 49-year-olds sitting around the table that more mirrors that particular age demographic, and you look in the mirror and you see what you get. Well, it could be. Yeah, it's just what you can read into it, right? It's a good age group, though. Very, very educated and sophisticated.
I think to your point, Mayor Bernie, yes, we can do a deep dive into health and ask specific questions, absolutely. In terms of frequency, a learning was we wouldn't go out with 3 emails in 1 week, and sort of, that was a bit too much for our community, but we needed to meet audit requirements for reporting. There's a piece of software called an API, which once we integrate it will be a bit of work for us, but once we integrate it with our core systems, we'll be able to trigger surveys close to near real time. So we've already identified our customer, like our CRM, so when customers call us as the first first proof of concept for using that API. So when a CRM is closed, then a survey will be triggered. And there's a whole bunch of smarts in the back end that, if we want to turn them on, mean that for any detractor score that we get after a CRM, it goes straight to the leader. Equally, any promoter scores go straight to the leader too, so that they can congratulate their staff on good, excellent service. So we will, though, when it comes to things like roading and water, need to build out a matrix so that we send them out at regular intervals throughout the year. Yeah.
Kia ora, guys. Thank you for the presentation. I found it really useful. Good data. Couple of comments, as I do actually support some of that, but I also support the conversations that other councillors have made. I just look at our top 10 on a page, and many of those points actually relate to this anyway. And because I'm Māori Ward Councillor, of course, I'm going to raise the prints of the treaty and our obligations to our Māori community, and also we have on their strong communities. And there's a couple of major things that we follow. And then I look at our top 10, and we talk about enabling affordable homes, but that also means having healthy homes. I keep looking through the document here, rates reviews and stuff, policy reviews, that's all aligns to having the right data for council to be able to make good decisions to assist. We talked tonight about low-income families, and I know there wasn't a lot of uptake around it, but that data for me is also really important to have. It informs this table around decisions like that. And then I even look into our pillars, our people matter, work matters, performance matters, and I think that's all applicable to this. So that's all I wanted to share in that space. But I suppose too, I'm sitting here thinking it would be great in time to have some stats around Māori Ward. And so I don't know how you're going to collect that. When I think about Māori Ward, it's the whole district. That might actually make your stats move around a little bit. You might get a better picture or not. But I suppose I just put that out there as, how do we gather that sort of information as well? Thanks.
I guess the short answer would be we can do it to a degree if we integrate the data that Lisa's talking about from a role perspective, and whether that aligns with the Māori Ward, because then we can take the respondents and then align them with that accordingly. At the moment, when we're aligning the wards through the presentation, that was a geographical alignment, and so it's about obtaining the data, making sure we've got correct data governance around some of that stuff as far as how we're collecting that information, and then we can start looking into it more depth and seeing what it shows us here.
Yeah, I know it wasn't a simple question. I was just putting it out there because it's just to start planting the seed and thinking about how we could be collating that sort of data because it's really important for us to understand what's happening with our people as well. So, thank you.
Yeah, I'm conscious of time, so I think we'll wrap it up. This is obviously just a snapshot of all of the data, all of the insights that the team have gathered. We'll make sure that this is put up on the portal, but also any of the associated documentation for those of you who want to go through all the verbatim comments or are interested in I suppose more of the raw data. Probably what I do just want to acknowledge Lisa, Martin, Margaret, and Eve, who isn't here tonight, because it's really easy for councils to do a survey by ringing a research company and saying, can we pay you X amount of dollars to do this survey? It's another thing actually building that capability inside your business where like our business analysts aren't just telling us what the data is, they're telling us what the data is. And if you couldn't tell by the way that they shared that presentation, which I did no coaching of, by the way, like they're brought into the story and they're actually coaching the organisation around that continuous improvement journey. And so I just want to acknowledge your efforts because I know how much time you've all put into this. So thank you, team. It's much appreciated.
Yeah, no, thanks. Look, it's great to be able to see some of that stuff and be able to understand the impact that the whole organisation has on the community and identify the work-ons. I think that's just as important. So, yeah, no, I really appreciate it. Cheers.